This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Place to Be Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Movie Review of the Day here on the Pop Experience. I'm Steve Riddle, back for another go-around, and today we're continuing with our theme week this week, where we're looking at remakes. Of course, there have been many great remakes over the years. Of course, this is the first time we're doing this, and definitely won't be the last time. And majority of the films we talked about this week have mainly been like more modern, if you want to say, like the last 10 or 20 years or so, but I'm actually going to go back to the 80s for today's film. And it's a film that actually for a long time never knew was a remake until I, looked it up, learned about it a couple of years ago. And this was always a film that's been on my my shame list, as it were, but now I'm able to finally say that I can say it's not anymore. So I'm definitely, glad about that. And it's one of those, it's a film that has definitely, inspired a lot of different things that I'll talk about, throughout here. But the film I'm doing for you today is Scarface. This was released on December 9th, 1983. Budget $23.5 to $37 million, so a box office of $66.4, so a little success there. Starring Al Pacino, Stephen Bauer, Michele Pfeiffer, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio Robert Loggia, Miriam Colon, F. Murray Abraham, Paul Schenner, Harris Yulin, among others. It, of course, tells a story of a Cuban refugee who works his way up the drug syndicate in Miami from a low level, bodyguard, I guess you could say, all the way to becoming a mob boss, and all the trouble and turmoil he experiences along the way as he starts to alienate himself from his friends and his family. So, like I said, this is a remake of the 1932 film of the same name, Scarface. That one, the main character is an Italian immigrant instead of a Cuban immigrant, and they rise to the ranks of the Chicago bootleg syndicate. They're kind of almost like basically kind of a parallel to that film was kind of a parallel to the rise of Al Capone in Chicago during that time. So, as I usually like to do, I will start off here with the 3 things that worked and 3 things that didn't work. So, 3 things that worked. Number 1, reading up on the 1932 film, which I have never seen before. I don't know if it's even... I'm sure it's got to be available somewhere. Actually, I'm just going to do, while I'm here, I'm going to do a quick look at it. So if you want, you can actually watch it. It is on YouTube, and it's on a couple of other, the pay subscriptions. So it is out there somewhere. But yeah, reading up on the film, it is really insane how identical the original one is to this remake. Obviously, again, you get the differences. Instead of a Italian immigrant, it's a Cuban immigrant. Instead of it being in the 1920s Chicago, we're here in 1980s Miami, right at the height of when a bunch of the Cuban population, the population of Cuba, were fleeing Fidel Castro and making their way towards the U.S. And instead of the bootlegging in the original film, this one, of course, is all about the drug trade, particularly cocaine, which was, in that, even in real life at that time in the 80s, was, becoming a major problem for the U.S. government. So, again, very, it's actually pretty cool how they really didn't steer too much from the original film. Just again switching some of the stuff around, but for the most part, it's all follows pretty much the same storyline. And the one thing I do like between the two is the whole the quote of "the world is yours," which is in the original film and is, of course, prominently in this film because when Tony's at one point asked what he wants, he basically says he wants the world and everything that he deserves. And of course, that iconic scene at the end there where after he gets killed, and we see first we see I think it's a blimp fly by, and it's promoting an airline, and that's where he sees the world is yours for the first time, and then he puts it on the globe in in his mansion, and that's the last thing we see after he gets killed. So it does again make me want to go back and watch the original 32 film just to kind of see how similar the two films are, just with those little bit of differences. So number 2. Tony is definitely a very interesting man in that he clearly wants big things in his life. I mean, he comes in, he's this Cuban refugee, kind of a small time crook, and he basically he's like always got these big dreams, and he's definitely committed to make it succeed, and he doesn't care who he steps on along the way, as we see here. He pretty much is willing to step over Frank Lopez to get to the top, because he thinks his connection with Sosa will keep him safe. But then of course we see that moment where he for a man that has done so much wrong, the one time he actually does the right thing and tries to protect someone because he's protects the reporter because he's with his family, that's what ends up costing him in the end. And seeing his decline throughout the film, from being this kind of confident and smooth talking guy, and then eventually his one of the rules that it's interesting. Again, one of the rules Lopez has is don't take too much of your own product. And at one point, that's all Tony does, and obviously that leads him to paranoia and violent outbursts, and eventually leads him to his ultimate demise. And I thought the film actually did a really good job in portraying that throughout the film. Throughout the course of it, where you see Tony kind of go from the highest of highs to the ultimate end, which is his death. So, so again, I thought that was very, very well done. And number 3, the relationship between Tony and Manny is a really, really good one here, because unlike Tony, Manny's just kind of like, he just wants to have fun. He wants to, pick up chicks, and he just wants to live life. And he's kind of he's basically the yin to Tony's yang. And at first, they work together, obviously they work together really well. They care about each other. They're protecting each other. But then as Tony's kind of descending into madness, he even starts pushing Manny away. And you can kind of see it. You definitely see it in Manny, how hurt he is that, he of all people, he thought he was the one guy that Tony could always trust. And when he sees Tony doesn't trust him anymore, it hurts him. And then at the same time, him courting Tony's sister, Gina, and, much to Tony's chagrin. And of course, that moment at the end there where Tony finds them and in a cocaine-filled rage kills Manny unprovoked. It was just a really sad end there. So, but again, I really enjoyed how they really played up the relationship between those two throughout the course of the film. So I do like that. And now we go to the 3 things that didn't work. Number 1. The character of Elvira really kind of is an interesting one. She starts, we first meet her. She's, Lopez's wife, who seems clearly not happy. And her relationship with Tony kind of, is an interesting dichotomy, because like at first she's disgusted with him. Eventually she kind of warms up to him. And then after Lopez is killed, they become married. And then honestly, you could probably say her relationship with Tony's even worse, because then, Tony's, insulting her, calling her out. And then, of course, that moment at the end there where we last see her, where he basically calls her out for being infertile, which, given how, she's basically, in she is basically, an addict throughout this whole thing, because we see her constantly, snorting. Um, that's basically what brings her to her breaking point. But I don't know, she just seemed kind of like window dressing throughout the film, and I feel like we could have done a little bit more with her, honestly. Maybe kind of like, I know, like, her, like, the relationship with her and Tony breaking down is, helps lead him further into his descent. But I don't know, I feel like we didn't get enough of that, in my opinion. So number 2, you feel really bad for Gina, because you can see she loves her brother, even though their mom is clearly, she does not like what Tony is and what he's done and what he's become. And Gina, we kind of see her, she's this like nice innocent girl, and then she kind of starts getting roped into that world. She and Manny have such a, seem like they start a good relationship. And then, of course, that moment where Tony finds them and kills Manny, and then she reveals that they got married, and Tony's just absolute, complete descent. And then the very end there, right before Sosa's men attack, she kind of comes in, all kind of, hopped up, and she basically accuses Tony of wanting, her for himself, almost, kind of an incestuous thing. And she meets an unfortunate end too. I mean, that one hitman comes in and just brutalizes her with bullets. It's just, again, very sad. Someone who was, started out innocent becomes a major victim in this. But my point is that I feel like we didn't get enough of, that relationship with her and Tony. We see it periodically throughout the film, but I feel like, there wasn't enough done there. Particularly, it would have been also nice to see Gina and Manny kind of, we see a little bit more of that, even though this is kind of mainly all about Tony. It would have been nice to kind of see how how Gina and Manny's relationship had grown to the point where they eventually did get married. So again, just kind of a small nitpick there. And number 3, this is a long movie. It's like almost it's like 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it's a lot of there's like a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of juxtaposition and transitioning, and setting up things. And it's like, because when the film first came out, there was a lot of backlash behind it because of how violent it was, and it does get violent in it, but it feels like when you really think about it, of the time of the film, the violence is only like about 45 minutes of it, and then the rest of the 2 hours is basically a lot of, again, dialogue and everything. So maybe they could have cut it down a little bit, kind of because some of those scenes do go on a little bit too long, particularly like when Tony confronts Lopez and takes him and Bernstein out. Like, that could have that seemed to go on forever a little bit. So again, maybe just one thing where like they could have just cut it down a little bit, just to kind of maybe make the film a little bit tighter and things. So just again, another idea. And now we'll go ahead and do my my awards here. So my MVP of the film, I mean, it has to be Al Pacino. He is fantastic as Tony, and he just brings that character to life. He dives full on into that character, and he's obviously done a lot of great work over the years, but I think this is the one everybody remembers. And of course, as we all know, for us wrestling fans, it was Tony Montana that served as the inspiration for Scott Hall creating the Razor Ramon character. So, just again, so iconic, and just, a great performance. But honestly, though, Tony's not my favorite character, surprisingly enough. My favorite character is actually Manny. I think he, again, provides a lot of, kind of levity to the film. Like, again, he's always so happy-go-lucky. He's always, trying to flirt with the ladies. And again, just trying to be the man that kind of tries to keep Tony on the straight and narrow. So I thought he was, definitely the best character in there. And then my least favorite, I would probably have to say it's hard. There's some pretty good. There's not a lot of bad characters in there. I think I'd probably have to say Sosa, just because we don't see him that much throughout the film. We see him at the first point where Tony and Omar go to work out a deal, and then of course Omar gets killed because he's supposedly revealed as a police informant, which never really actually find out if that was true or not. And then we really don't see him again until the very end, till the end, where he promises to get Tony, to keep Tony out of jail if he takes up the supporter. And then when Tony doesn't, then we get that moment where we see Sosa. He has that great line, is like, I warned you one time not to fuck with me. And I thought Paul Scherer was good as Sosa, but I don't know. I would have liked a little bit more out of him. Favorite scene? Again, there's a lot of really good scenes in here. There are a couple of scenes, like I said, that go a little too long, but I think the best scene, I think my favorite scene would have to be the final showdown there with Tony and with Sosa's henchmen. Of course, that's where we get the iconic "Say hello to my little friend" quote. One of the most quoted lines in history of cinema, and just that moment of Tony just waiting these guys to laying these guys out, and just because he thinks he's become so untouchable. He thinks he's the greatest, and he's getting he's getting laid to waste all these bullets, but he's saying he's still standing until that last assassin there just kind of gets him in the back with a shotgun and finally puts him down. So yeah, that definitely was, I think, my favorite scene. And final grade, I actually really enjoyed this. Like I said, I haven't seen it. I've never seen it before. This is the first time I've I've ever watched it. I've heard a lot about it. I obviously know all about the, like I said, I mentioned how, the Razor Ramon, and obviously me being a big Grand Theft Auto fan, if you play Vice City, that's pretty much just, this, kind of in a video game form, because, you can see Tommy Vercetti kind of sliding in the role of Tony Montana. And I mean, the mansion of the game is based off Tony's mansion. Again, it's all, about the cocaine distribution, and it's just, I mean, there's a lot really good with this film. I mean, the soundtrack, obviously, they hit that really well, with, of course, being in the early 80s. It has some good, that kind of good balance between being a colorful in Miami at that time, with the grittiness of this kind of criminal underworld. And I think it's, again, just one of those ones where it's funny, we talk about we have I'll just actually go ahead and tease something. We will have a theme week later this year when it comes to mob films, and I know this film is widely considered one of the greatest mob films of all time, and I think it definitely, even to this day, still holds up really well. So I'm actually going to go, and I did really, I mean, I know I kind of said about the length, but it did flow fairly well. So I'm actually going to go, I'm not going to go perfect score, because I don't think it's that up there, but I am going to go 8.5 out of 10. Maybe if I was doing quarters, I'd do 8.75. It had, again, a lot of great moments. It is pretty violent, so if you're kind of squeamish, that sort of thing. I mean, there's a scene where Tony's friend Angel's getting you don't see it, but but it's obviously implied about how he gets mauled by his friend Angel gets mauled by a chainsaw. So if you're not up to that, then I probably wouldn't recommend it. But if you want to see a really just kind of strong film carried by a great actor, I definitely recommend at least once. So, yeah, 8.5 out of 10 is my final grade here. So that's going to do it for me. We do have one more film coming up this week, and then we are continuing on. Our next theme week I'm really looking forward to, because since we are going to be starting the summer, we're going to be hitting summer blockbusters. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, just be on the lookout for that. Continue to support us, and continue to, listen, and we will continue to provide all this content for you. So with that, I am Steve Riddle. This has been the movie review of the day here on the Pop Experience, and we'll see you next time.